There was utter silence in the courtroom. The verdict that rocked Michael Carter's life was delivered with a slamming gavel. Michael, a 15-year veteran and decorated cop, sat handcuffed and looked at the ground, feeling guilty. The jury had found against him in spite of his constant assertions of innocence. He was positive that the planted evidence was sufficient to imprison him. What broke him the most, though, was not the sentence's weight. It was the realization that he would have to split ways with his faithful K-9 partner, Luke. Sitting close to the rear of the courtroom, Luke's piercing eyes were fixed on Michael. More than just a companion, the German Shepherd had been. Throughout moments of life or death, he had been Michael's constant companion. Now that Michael was at his lowest, the idea of never seeing Luke again was too much to take. The uncomfortable silence was broken by Michael's voice as the judge stood up to depart. "Your Honor," he remarked. His voice broke. "I have one more thing to ask before I'm taken away. Please allow me to bid Luke farewell." There was a startled mutter in the courtroom. The judge took a long break from examining Michael. He nodded at last, his tone hard but understanding. He said 3 minutes. The dog's claws clicked loudly on the ground as it ran for Michael as soon as Luke was freed. Michael fell to his knees and drew Luke into a close hug. "I'm so sorry, friend." With tears running down his cheeks, Michael muttered, "I failed you. I will no longer be there." Whimpering, Luke pressed himself against Michael's chest. Then, however, something altered. Luke's nose started to work frantically against Michael's jacket as his body tightened. He gave a harsh growl and pulled at the cloth. Every eye was drawn to the abrupt sound that disturbed the solemn silence of the courtroom. "The dog is doing what?" The judge frowned as he asked. Luke's piercing barks reverberated off the walls as he pushed harder. With caution, one of the officers moved forward and started looking through Michael's jacket. The room grew oppressively tense. Then something little dropped to the floor with a metallic clink. It was an apparatus for recording. It made the prosecutor's face go white. With a trembling voice, he hurried forward. "Nothing is proven by this." In an attempt to recover control of the situation, he snapped. But Luke's vigilant posture remained unwavering, and he barked once again. The truth was obvious. It didn't matter what was on the device. Michael's heart was racing as he gazed at the tiny recorder. Hope flashed for the first time in weeks. Is this the evidence he's been looking for? Did you sense the strength of Michael and Luke's relationship? Just think of what else this compelling and poignant tale has in store. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel to learn more about what's on that recorder and how it could alter everything. Just beginning is the next exciting moment. There was a startled quiet in the courtroom. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the metallic case of the small recording device glinted as it lay in the middle of the floor. Luke stood up next to Michael, his sharp barks tearing through the space as though he was demanding attention. Tension filled the air as every pair of eyes shifted to the thing. The judge said in a forceful yet hushed voice, "Pick it up." After a brief moment of hesitation, the officer nearest the gadget bent down and took it in his hand. His expression was filled with surprise as he held it out for everyone to see. "What is this?" With a stern question, the judge looked at the prosecutor, who was already starting to perspire. The prosecutor's face became white as he cleared his throat. "This, Your Honor, is unimportant." He stumbled. "It's not part of the evidence submitted during the trial. It has obviously been messed with." "Modified?" The judge's eyebrows knitted together as he intervened. His voice now had a razor-sharp edge, and the prosecutor winced in a courtroom during sentencing. "Officer, turn the gadget on." The cop fumbled with the tiny recorder, pressing the play button with shaking fingers. The room was filled with a crackle of static, then hushed murmurs. Everyone strained to hear, leaning forward. Then, like a bombshell, the words came. A rough voice replied, "Just plant the evidence." And it was as obvious as day that no one would challenge it. Carter is the ideal scapegoat because of his spotless record. "Finish it." Across the room, gas sprang out. After stopping, Michael's heart started beating frantically. That voice was familiar to him. It belonged to Captain Ray Harding, his former boss, whom he had trusted. The prosecutor hurried over to the officer with the recorder and screamed, "That's enough." The judge, however, smashed his gavel. He yelled, "Sit down," in a voice so authoritative that the prosecutor stopped in his tracks. What Michael was hearing was unbelievable. Everything was exposed by the incriminating recording, including how he had been framed and how the evidence had been fabricated. As though mirroring his partner's silent rage, Luke, who was still sitting quietly by Michael's side, gave a single low growl. The judge's face was grim as he reclined in his chair. Speaking forcefully to the room, he declared, "This trial is not over." The defendant is escorted back to holding by bailiffs. That device is taken by officers as fresh evidence. This case is being reopened. Michael felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Luke's perceptive eyes were filled with unwavering loyalty as he saw him being led away, silently vowing to himself and Luke that he would not allow this injustice to continue. Michael turned back for a final glance at his buddy. Michael sat on the hard bench in the frigid holding cell, staring at the blank concrete wall. With all that had just transpired, his mind was racing. Luke's keen intuition had discovered evidence of a setup that no one else had. The discovery wasn't merely a relief, but that recording was his lifeblood. It was treacherous. It was the brainchild of his longtime mentor, Captain Ray Harding. Michael's jaw tightened as he clenched his fists. To what extent did this go? Meanwhile, there was a lot of tension in the judge's chambers. Replaying the footage on a secure device, the judge sat at his desk. There was no mistaking the voices. A well-thought-out plot was exposed by Captain Harding's authoritative tone and a different voice that Michael was unfamiliar with. The judge's gaze grew strained. He hit one of his intercom's buttons. He curtly responded, "Send Captain Harding to my office immediately." Harding had been waiting outside the courtroom, at least for his plan, to make sure Michael's sentencing went well. However, a glimmer of discomfort appeared on his face when the bailiff came up to him bearing the judge's unexpected summons. Stiffly, he got up, straightened his tie, and went down the corridor after the officer. As Harding entered the chambers, the judge's face was inscrutable. With a courteous nod, the captain's shoulders tensed. "Your Honor, you summoned me?" Harding's eyes darted anxiously toward the recording device on the desk, but his voice remained steady as he asked. The judge leaned forward and said, "I did." He tapped his finger on the recorder. "Would you mind explaining?" For a moment, Harding's confident facade wavered, but he swiftly covered it up with bewilderment. "Your Honor," he answered quietly. "I don't know what you mean." The judge hit the play button. The chamber was filled with the dreadful words once more. Harding's face lost color, but he bounced back fast. "This is ridiculous, Your Honor," Harding replied, eliciting a laugh. "Anyone might be that. You're not capable of thinking." The judge didn't seem to cut him off abruptly. He pointed to the recorder and said, "This is evidence of a crime, and I act on evidence." In reality, several offenses. Bailiffs. 2 bailiffs came in before Harding could answer. His eyes glowed with panic as they came at him. "What are you doing?" Harding's voice rose as he demanded. "You can't. You are being held for interrogation," the judge stated forcefully. "You are under suspicion of obstructing justice and fabricating evidence until we find out the truth." The judge leaned back in his chair and let out a big breath as the bailiffs escorted a protesting Harding away. Michael Carter's narrative was far from ended, and the corruption web was rapidly coming apart. The entire department was in disarray after the recording was discovered. Among the officers, rumors of corruption spread like wildfire when Captain Harding was hauled into custody. Michael, meanwhile, sat in his holding cell, oblivious to the storm that was building outside. He kept thinking about Luke. Michael couldn't help but wonder now that the devoted K-9 had discovered the gadget. What else could Luke reveal if he could discover that? Luke was also brought to the department's K-9 unit for assessment. One of Michael's closest co-workers, Officer Sarah Mitchell, had offered to watch the dog while the matter was being handled. Luke appeared agitated, pacing his kennel and occasionally barking sharply, which reverberated throughout the otherwise silent structure. Sarah, seeing him from outside the kennel, whispered, "He knows something's wrong." She squatted down and met Luke's eyes. "Don't worry, friend. We'll work it out." Sarah got to her feet, though, and looked at Luke's nose as it pressed against the gate and sniffed at her jacket. Her belly rumbled. Was she seeing things, or was her conduct related to Michael's case? After a brief pause, She opened the entrance to the kennel. She grabbed Luke's collar and said, "All right, boy. Let's see if you have something to tell us." In the department storage area, she led Luke to Michael's locker. The dog started sniffing and pawing at the compartment right away. As Sarah opened the door and unlocked it, her heart pounded. There was a little, unlabeled envelope inside, under a few folded uniforms. She took it out and opened it with shaking hands. There were grainy yet damning photos inside. A man who was obviously Captain Harding was depicted meeting with a notorious criminal. Behind the pictures was a document detailing transactions that linked Harding to a bribery plot connected to the same case that had resulted in Michael's detention. Sarah's chest constricted as she gazed at the proof. "Luke," she said in a broken voice, "the smoking pistol was just discovered by you." As soon as Sarah realized how much she held, she called the judge's office. Harding's guilt was evident from the pictures and records, as well as the recording Luke had discovered. Sarah, though, understood that this was not the end. Harding probably wouldn't have done this setup alone if he had planned it. As her mind raced, Luke's solid presence at her side helped to ground her. She scratched behind Luke's ears and added softly, "Michael was right. No one could ask for a better spouse than you." The incriminating pictures were arranged on the desk in front of Sarah as she sat in the evidence room. Her chest ached from the weight of what she had discovered. Captain Harding was a part of something far more than a dishonest officer. The documents that Luke had assisted in locating detailed ties to other powerful authorities, unexplained payments, and an unsettling pattern of influence that extended well beyond Michael's case. Luke was sitting alertly next to her as she looked down at him. He appeared to perceive her uneasiness with his piercing eyes. Her voice was barely audible as she murmured, "This isn't just about Michael. This is far more profound." Sarah made a straight call to the judge after realizing how serious the matter was. The proof she had found was in his possession within 1 hour. As he looked over the papers and pictures, the judge's expression deteriorated. He said with a somber voice, "This is bigger than I thought. According to these materials, Michael Carter is not only innocent. He is the victim of a cover-up involving the entire department." An emergency hearing was set right away by the court. The precinct was rocked by the news of the case's reopening. As suspicions increased, tensions increased as officers chatted in hallways. Knowing that their involvement may be questioned, a few of the cops who had testified against Michael started to wriggle. Michael was suddenly called out back in his cell. His heart pounded at the sudden bustle in the holding section of the jail. The judge and Sarah were waiting for him in a secure area. Michael's heart grew with a mix of disbelief and hope when he saw the evidence folder and Luke sitting triumphantly next to Sarah. The judge slid the papers in Michael's direction and stated, "This just came in. It demonstrates Harding's corruption and, above all, that the evidence that was used to convict you was false." Michael looked over the pages, his hands shaking. The documents, the pictures, and even the notes that showed how Harding had fabricated evidence against him. Everything was there. "Does this mean," he questioned, his voice cracking. The judge gave a firm nod. "It indicates that you are now free, yet there is still more to come. We will need your assistance in exposing the other individuals implicated." Michael dropped to his knees and drew Luke into another hug. "Boy, you saved me," he muttered. "Once more, you came to my rescue." There was an obvious sense of relief in the room as Luke wagged his tail. But Michael knew that this was only the beginning. The person who had planned this was more complex than Harding. There were still more facets to reveal, and Michael would not stop until the whole truth was revealed. In your opinion, what will occur next? Will Michael discover the whole truth about this plot? Leave a comment with your ideas. When Michael first left the courts as a free man, the burden of his future was much greater than the weight of the shackles he had just removed. Questions concerning his release, the reopened case, and the corruption scandal developing within the department were shouted by reporters as they crowded the steps. Michael chose to ignore them, concentrating only on Luke, who marched obediently beside him. In the midst of the mayhem, there was a glimmer of optimism when he saw his faithful K-9 partner. The judge had assembled a special task force inside the courthouse to look into the expanding corruption network. Leading the charge was Sarah, who was now a vital member of the squad. A vast network of bribery and evidence tampering involving numerous officials and even outside parties was revealed by the photographs, recordings, and financial documents Luke had assisted in locating. Captain Harding was only the beginning. Sarah caught up to him outside the courthouse and said, "Michael, we need your assistance. You are the one who knows this department the best." Michael's jaw tensed as he paused. He had believed in the integrity of the system and trusted the badge throughout his career. That trust was now broken. However, as he gazed down at Luke, the dog's serene, resolute eyes served as a reminder of his initial motivation for joining the force. At last he said, "I'm in. However, I'm not working for the department on this. I am doing this for the sake of the truth and for all the officers who continue to stand up for what is right." The inquiry started in earnest. Michael and Sarah put in endless hours, interviewing police who had worked closely with Harding, establishing timetables and cross-referencing cases. While some were open to working together, others refused to collaborate, which only served to increase suspicions. During searches of Harding's office and locker, Luke played an unexpected role by spotting hidden files and pointing out evidence that had been missed. Sarah came into a list of names, officers, local politicians, and known criminals connected to unusual payments and unsolved crimes one evening while going through a stack of old case files. The track grew increasingly hazardous as they delved deeper. This was obviously more than merely Michael's case. It concerned a whole network of individuals who had abused their position of authority to conceal crimes and eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Sarah said, "Michael," in a worried tone, "we will create enemies, dangerous ones, if we pursue this any further." Michael raised his head from the file he was looking at. "I'm not stopping," he said, "but we've already made them. Not until the complete truth is revealed." Luke gave a low growl as though he agreed. Hardening his resolve, Michael reached down and scratched the dog behind the ears. They were no longer only fighting for justice. For everyone who had been framed, betrayed, or silenced, they were battling. Around the clock, the task team was at work. The small conference room that had become the headquarters of the investigation was crammed with boxes of evidence on every desk. Michael had pushed himself into the task, now that he was formally exonerated of all allegations. The web of corruption grew more tangled the more they probed. Intercepted communications, fabricated police reports, and bank records all suggested a vast conspiracy that went well beyond Captain Harding. Sarah grimaced as she set a heavy folder in front of Michael. She stated, "We have identified at least 6 other officers who were involved in this. It grows worse with high-ranking individuals. They are linked to organized crime according to the evidence." With his thoughts racing, Michael reclined on his chair. These were not merely renegade policemen disobeying the law for their own benefit. This was a well-planned operation that combined criminal activity outside the department with corruption inside it. He remarked, "We can't handle this alone if it's as big as it looks. The federal must be taken." Sarah, however, shook her head. "Not quite yet. Important components are still needed. The entire plot may fall apart if we bring this to the FBI right away and they leak it. We require a conclusive measure that binds these individuals to their positions." Luke abruptly got up from where he had been lying by Michael's feet, interrupting their talk. The dog sniffed the air as he approached the door, his ears perked up. Michael scowled. "Boy, what is it?" He followed Luke and asked. Michael followed Luke to the far side of the conference room, where an untidy pile of old case files was lying. Sarah trailed after and observed Luke pawing at a certain box. With his heart racing, Michael opened it. Files from a cocaine bust investigation that was closed 5 years ago and allegedly led to a clean sweep of arrests were found inside. However, Michael saw stark discrepancies as he leafed through the papers. Some parts of the reports were blacked out, and names had been removed. "This isn't logical," Michael murmured. "These redactions are not typical. These files were altered by someone." Leaning over his shoulder was Sarah. She pointed to a handwritten note at the bottom of one report and remarked, "And look at this." Captain Harding's signature was on it. The evidence in the box indicated that the operation had been a smokescreen to eliminate competitors in the drug trade while protecting some offenders who were paying off the department. Even if the drug raid had been the ideal cover. Michael's fists clenched. With venom in his voice, He claimed that they were playing both sides and that they had destroyed the lives of fine officers in order to do so. Michael's phone buzzed as they were still going through the files. The text came from an unidentified number. "You're going too far. You'll regret it if you continue." After a long minute of staring at the SCR, he revealed Sarah. Her face was pallid but determined as she gazed up at him. She stated they're afraid. "That indicates that we are approaching." Michael looked at Luke, who was sitting quietly next to him, seemingly prepared for whatever was about to happen. He said, "Let them come. Now, we're not going to stop." Michael gazed at his phone's messages. "You're going too far. You'll regret it if you continue." He was chilled by the message. It was a clear threat rather than merely an ambiguous warning. Sarah leaned over the desk and looked sad as he showed it to her. "This isn't random," she muttered. "They are well aware of the project we are working on. We've been under their observation." As the weight of her words settled in, they hung thick in the air. Michael and Sarah remained behind, intent on finding the missing piece of the puzzle, while the rest of the team went out for the evening. Luke sat at Michael's feet, his ears twitching every now and then. Sarah rummaged through the files and stated, "We're close, but we're still missing the key." She gestured toward a document that Michael had never seen before. "Take a look at this. One name, RK, is linked to every significant bribe and deleted report. The strings are being pulled by them." Michael peered at the initials, his eyes narrowing. "RK," he whispered. "This whole plan falls apart if we discover them, but they have managed to remain concealed this long." Luke arose abruptly, his body tight, his ears flicking forward, and a low growl escaping his lips. Alarmed, Michael glanced down at him. "What is it, boy?" he inquired. However, the meeting room's lights flickered and eventually went out entirely before Sarah could respond. Then the room was completely dark. Sarah froze, reaching for her pistol out of instinct. "That's not a power outage," she stated in a steady, low voice. The silence was broken by the sound of glass shattering, and then there was the distinct thud of footfall outside the door. Adrenaline shot through Michael's veins, making his heart speed. He gestured for Sarah to hide. "Don't worry," he muttered. Luke's snarl deepened as he hunched over, his piercing eyes focused on the doorway. The sender of the text wasn't playing a fake. They were here to put an end to the inquiry. The sound of footsteps increased, getting closer. With his mind racing through the possibilities, Michael tightened his hold on his firearm. "Luke, stay close," he muttered. Sarah's eyes met his, her face determined. "Anything goes," she said. "We prevent them from winning." Luke jumped forward, his instincts keen and prepared, as the door cracked open. Michael steadied his aim in anticipation of whatever may enter through that door. The battle to reveal the truth had suddenly turned deadly, and they were being attacked. In a second, the door flew open, and mayhem broke out. A silhouette entered the room with a weapon in hand. Luke made a lightning-fast lunge and clamped his jaws around the intruder's arm before they could respond. As he attempted to shake the dog off, the man let out a guttural scream and dropped his firearm. Michael made no hesitation. He used his foot to sweep the gun aside and aimed his own rifle at the second person that was now hurrying through the doorway. Michael said, "Don't move," his voice piercing the confusion. The second intruder froze, hands up, but he could tell by the stiffness in their posture that they were waiting for a chance to attack. Sarah had taken refuge behind him and was using her radio to ask for help in a steady but frantic voice. As the intruder battled, Luke remained steadfast on the first man, snarling low. "Get rid of him!" Panically, the man screamed. With his pistol steady, Michael took a step forward. "First, call them off." Shooting back, he gestured to the others outside. He heard more heavy, purposeful footsteps reverberating through the hall. These folks, whomever they were, had not arrived to engage in negotiations. The man remained silent, but before Michael could say anything further, there was a loud noise and the sound of tear gas canisters being flung into the room. The room filled with thick, pungent smoke that irritated their throats and eyes. Sarah exclaimed, "We're out of time," and grabbed the files they had been working on. "We must relocate." When Michael gave a harsh whistle, Luke instantly let go of the man's arm and retreated to Michael's side. The group hurried for the emergency exit at the rear of the room, diving low to avoid the gas. Behind them, gunfire broke out, with bullets pinging off furniture and walls. As Michael protected Sarah and Luke and fired back to halt their pursuers, he could feel his heart thumping in his ears. They rushed out the door and into the shadowy alley behind the structure. Breathing heavily, Sarah held the folders close to her chest. In between breaths, she stated, "We can't return to the precinct. Everything has been contaminated by them. They'll be anticipating our arrival." With his thoughts racing, Michael nodded. "Juevet Irka." They were playing for keeps, that's what. But Michael's resolve was bolstered as he glanced down at Luke, who stood behind him, panting but unflinching. Then he replied, "We completed this on our terms. We are no longer running." It was disturbingly silent in the safe home. After barely escaping the attack at the precinct, Michael, Sarah, and Luke had retreated there. Their last haven was a tiny hut tucked away in the woods. The files Sarah had been able to rescue were strewn around the wooden table in front of them. They had all they required in order to reveal the network: names, transaction logs, and connections to RK, the mysterious person who had planned everything. Sarah's fingers shook a little as she glanced through the folders. She said, "This is it. They won't be able to hide it if we can get this in front of federal investigators or the media. The whole thing will fall apart." Michael nodded, but his gaze continued to sweep the tree line outside the window. It wasn't over, he knew. Until they were silenced, whomever had attacked them would not stop. Luke's body tensed as his ears suddenly perked up and he growled softly. Michael's hand automatically went to his weapon as he froze. He murmured, "They found us." Sarah's face was white but resolute as she gazed up. "How?" "We have exercise caution." Michael gave a head shake. "It makes no difference. They're present." The silence was broken by the first shot, which came through the glass of the cabin. As Michael pushed Sarah behind the table for protection, glass sprayed all over the room. Luke stood his ground at Michael's side and let out a loud bark. The assailants were getting closer as more rounds were fired. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Michael inhaled deeply. He told Sarah to stay down. "I'll hold them off," along with Luke. He moved in perfect time with Luke. Michael shot, eliminating one of the invaders as the attackers broke through the front entrance. Luke swung at another, bringing the man to the ground with his strong teeth. But the assailants continued to arrive. Sarah crept over to the files, picked up the most crucial ones, and stuffed them into a bag. Over the gunfire, she called out, "Michael, we must leave this place immediately." Michael grimaced as he nodded. "Proceed, Luke, and I'll take care of you." After a brief moment of hesitation, Sarah slipped out the back door and vanished into the night with the proof. Using all of their remaining might, Michael and Luke repelled the attackers as they held their ground. Sirens sounded in the distance as the final intruder collapsed. At last, backup had come. The news spread across the country a few days later. After Sarah gave the files to a reliable reporter, the network as a whole collapsed due to the expose that followed. Everyone was arrested, including RK and corrupt officers. He ought to be a strong local politician who had been utilizing the police force as his own personal bodyguards. Despite being praised as a hero, Michael dismissed the adulation. He was watching Luke play in the yard from his porch at home. They had become inseparable after the devoted dog saved him more times than he could remember. Michael whispered softly as he knelt to scratch behind Luke's ears. "We did it, boy. It's finished." Luke's piercing eyes were peaceful for the first time in weeks as he leaned into Michael's touch and waggled his tail. It was more than merely the conclusion of a conflict for Michael. Something fresh was beginning. In addition to fighting for himself, he had done so on behalf of those who had been silenced and deceived. And he realized they had earned this peaceful time as he watched Luke chase after a ball in the golden light of the waning sun. What a fantastic tale, isn't it? Send a great sticker if it made you smile. Select your preferred sticker, choose the quantity, then confirm by clicking the icon beneath the video. Your assistance enables us to present more poignant tales. We appreciate you being here.